Welcome to Author to Empire, a series about authors whose written work led to popular franchises, characters that live beyond book pages, and real-world community impacts. Today's episode is about Laura Ingalls Wilder. Laura Ingalls Wilder was born February 7, 1867, in Pepin County, Wisconsin. She was one of four girls, Carrie, Mary, and Grace Ingalls. Her parents, Charles and Caroline, also had a son, Freddie, who lived from 1875 to 1876. Their family traveled by covered wagon and eventually settled in Smet, South Dakota in 1879. Laura Ingalls Wilder penned the 9-book Little House series, in which she documented her experiences as a child and growing up in the late 1800s in the American Midwest. Laura married Almanzo Wilder in 1885 in Smet, South Dakota. They had 2 children together, Rose Wilder Lane and an infant boy who lived for 12 days. Her daughter Rose herself was a notable journalist and author before her mother even was. Rose wrote Let the Hurricane Roar. According to Pioneer Girl, which is the autobiography of Laura Ingalls Wilder, I spent a good chunk of time reading the annotated version of Pioneer Girl. It was Laura's autobiography first published in 1930, and Rose actually ended up stealing names and stories from a project that Laura was writing, where she was documenting her lived experience as a girl. Rose even went as far, and this is her daughter, by the way, to name the main characters in Let the Hurricane Roar Charles and Caroline, Laura's parents' names and Rose's grandparents' names. This was revealed in the book and was quite the juicy detail. This also caused a significant rift between the two because at that time Rose was editing Laura's work, and Rose essentially stole the stories and characters and some plot lines and stories from Laura's work that Rose was editing. Despite this, Rose would continue editing her mother's work. Some suspect Rose actually allegedly ghost wrote the 9-book Little House series based on Laura's original autobiographical writings. William Holtz, a professor of English at the University of Missouri, and author of The Ghost in the Little House, which was released originally in 1993 by University of Missouri Press, contends that Wilder's daughter, Rose Wilder Lane, essentially ghost wrote all Little House books published. At this time, Laura was already known, however, for her articles and role as an editor in the Missouri Rule List in 1911. She held a permanent position as a columnist. The column was called As a Farm Woman Thinks, and she held that position until the mid-1920s. Quote, by 1924, according to Professor John E. Miller, after more than a decade of writing for farm papers, Wilder had become a disciplined writer, able to produce thoughtful, readable prose for a general audience. End quote. She was political and an activist. She believed in equality for all races, at least according to Wikipedia. She believed that farm women were already operating as equals to their husbands. Despite these suspicions that Laura's books were ghost-written, Laura's hopeful memoir, which she is credited for, became reimagined into The Little House in the Big Woods, her first book in 1932. The Little House series would go on to be published by Harper and Brothers and sell a reported 60 million copies and counting. The series is made up of 9 books. Little House in the Big Woods, 1932. Farmer Boy, 1933. Little House on the Prairie, 1935. On the Banks of Plum Creek, 1937, By the Shores of Silver Lake, 1939, The Long Winter, 1940, Little Town on the Prairie, 1941, These Happy Golden Years, 1943, and The First 4 Years, 1971. 5 of these were nominated for the famous Newbery Award, which is a writing award for children's literature. Fun fact, the original books were illustrated by Helen Sewell, whose father was the governor of Guam at that time. She illustrated many books, children books, including Sense and Sensibility by Jane Eyre. Let's talk about the impact of Laura Ingalls Wilder's novels. The books inspired a wildly popular television series, Little House on the Prairie, which used the likeness of characters, places, and plot lines in Laura's books. It is one of the most watched TV shows, and reruns still play today, although it originally ran from 1974 to 1983. The show boasts 16 Emmy Award nominations and 4 Emmys, including 2 Outstanding Cinematography Awards. In 1978, Melissa Sue Anderson, who played Laura's sister Mary, was also nominated for Outstanding Lead Actress in a Drama Series. There are 204 episodes starring Melissa Gilbert as a young Laura. Her parents were played by Michael Landon and Karen Grassel. 3 women on the cast, including Gilbert and Grassel, have since released their own memoirs documenting their experiences filming the show and being thrust into the spotlight by the series. Grassel's being one of the most controversial, alleging that Michael Landon stood in the way of her renegotiating her contract and pay after reaping the success of the first season. In her own voice.
It was all about the contract. It was all about that I wanted a raise and I wanted to be paid a fair salary like other people in top 10 shows. Mm-hmm. And I don't know why Mike was so set against it. I mean, it's so crazy. Yeah. It's not like it was going to hurt his financial position. It just doesn't make any sense.
Michael Landon, who had previously starred in Bonanza, became an executive producer on the show and was a household name at this time. Landon famously held a press conference in 1991, sharing with the press and the nation that he had been diagnosed with inoperable cancer and would die 3 months later. Let's listen in on that famous press conference now.
You have to have a sense of humor about everything. I don't find this particularly funny, but if you're going to try to go on, if you're going to try to beat something, you're not going to do it standing in the corner.
There is so much more to be said about this TV show, the cast, the characters, the cinematography, all of it. But for the purpose of this episode, we're going to move forward. The Little House books themselves are not shy to controversy either. In 2018, the American Library Association stripped Laura Ingalls Wilder's name from a famous literary award. This was due to concerns about racism and the way that people of color were represented and written about in her stories. The award is now called Children's Literacy Legacy Award, and its most recent award winner, children's book illustrator James Ransom. The depictions of people of color include blackface, slurs, and negative stereotypes of Black people and Native Americans. Actions that would, in no environment today, be acceptable. Quote, "It's very disturbing, but it's part of our history, and if we don't talk about these things honestly with our children, we are jeopardizing our future and the future of our country," end quote, said a woman interviewed by PBS's American Masters. Julie Goldberg, a librarian also interviewed about this, stated that Laura Ingalls Wilder could not be held up as a contemporary role model by the Library Association. In my research, I found that educators are using this book to spark modern conversations about culture, heritage, and racism. Now, Tanya Hart, assistant professor of history at the University of Kansas.
Writing from her time, she was writing fiction largely built upon experiences that she had seen in her own life. Doesn't mean that everyone thought this way, doesn't mean that everyone lived their lives this way. It's just a part of the puzzle. I think what's important, though, is if you want to have a look into what life was like at that time, Laura Ingalls Wilder is one person whom you can read. There are other sources that you need to look at, however, to see what was going on in the lives of Native Americans and African Americans, because they were there.
Despite the Legacy Award now void of her name, Laura Ingalls Wilder's legacy lives on through historic preservation. Many, if not all, of her residences are now literary landmarks. Her writings have sprung to life tourism in Smet, South Dakota, notably. Smet's slogan is, quote, "the Wilder life," end quote. They are home to the Laura Ingalls Wilder Memorial Society and the Laura Ingalls Wilder Home Association, who looks over the Rock House, a cottage built by Laura and her husband Almanzo with financial help from their author daughter Rose. Great care and effort goes into preserving her memory and items. The Memorial Society boasts the, quote, largest collection of Ingalls family memorabilia with over 2,000 original artifacts. Children are invited to try an old-fashioned sewing machine, dress like a pioneer, and learn how to read Braille at the Discovery Center, according to Smet's website. And to touch real quickly on Braille and the significance of this, Mary, Laura Ingalls Wilder's sister, actually did become blind due to a sickness. Each year, hundreds of visitors view the grave sites of several of the Ingalls family, including Charles, Caroline, Mary, Carrie, Grace, and the infant son of Laura and Almanzo Wilder. Children's literature, memoir, television, tourism, and historical preservation. Laura Ingalls Wilder, the famous author whose work built a multimedia empire that has and will continue to live on. Thank you for tuning in. This has been Author to Empire. To find sources and watch a video version of this episode, please visit the Author to Empire YouTube channel. Goodbye, everyone.